want to bring in Buck Sexton right now, a former CIA officer. Buck, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What do you think the U.S. should be doing right now to protect Americans against an attack when you see something like what has taken place in the last 24 hours? 3 attacks in one day.
They're going to be stepping up static security at crowded venues, places that would seem to be the kinds of choices, the kinds of target venues you may see for this kind of an attack. But quite honestly, there's very little you can really do to prevent this. And I think that's why it's so unsettling and so frightening to people. You can see a difference between this and what happened on Bastille Day in France, in Nice, is that there were no weapons that were found. It seems like they've recognized, that the terrorists have recognized, that just using a large vehicle with enough momentum can cause a mass casualty attack. So by going for weapons or by doing some of the additional things that have been done in the past, you actually heighten the chances of being stopped, right? You might get caught doing that. You might actually trip up somehow. Just getting into a very large vehicle and driving it into a crowded area is near impossible to stop. You can try to make it harder, but you're not going to get all of these.
And ISIS recommended this, right, in their magazine, basically saying, look, followers across the world, just get into cars and trucks and ram into crowded areas.
Yeah,
exactly
these sorts of terrorist acts go in waves. There's certainly a copycat effect as well. In the aftermath of an attack that killed over 80 people in France, it was really just a matter of time before we saw something similar to this. And I think what you can expect is that they'll try a sort of mix of these sorts of tactics going forward, using vehicles, perhaps vehicles in tandem, multiple vehicles at one time. And stopping this really requires getting the terrorists in the planning phase, because once it's actionable, now you're just hoping that barriers and other things you can put in place at large venues may stop a vehicle.
And in fact, you know, Rumia magazine, ISIS's newer magazine, talks about how spilling the blood of infidels honors Allah. That's what they're trying to share in this propaganda as they spread it. It talks about trying to kill businessmen who are in taxi cabs, people at sporting events, things like that. What can you say about the role of propaganda and what our intelligence community can do, what the Trump administration can sort of influence in terms of trying to stop this flow of propaganda, which is the communications device that's helping people to decide how to make these attacks against what a lot of people call soft targets, but what others would say is really cheap shots, low-hanging fruit.
That's also incredibly difficult, because every time you shut down one of the known jihadist forums, first of all, you're losing a source of intelligence, because oftentimes, especially if it's out in the open, if it's not necessarily encrypted or password protected, there's a lot of really valuable information you get off of there. But if you shut down some of the venues that are used to share the information among the jihadist community, another one will pop up very quickly, as we all know. In the digital world, you can have an endless amount of different communication hubs. So the counter-propaganda narrative that we're going to come up with, or that we should be coming up with, is something that no one's really figured out yet, quite honestly. I mean, we can put out there as much as you want, you know, don't mass murder innocent people because of jihad or because of what's happening in Aleppo or any number of other places. To reach this very specific, very small community that actually acts upon that kind of information in the first place has been a challenge for the intelligence community all along.
So we haven't had this wave of refugees that they have in Europe. What layer of protection does that give us here in the United States compared to these serial attacks that we keep seeing in Europe?
Well, one of the biggest problems the Germans have because of the 1 million refugees is just an issue of the security services and the resources that they have. While we in this country know, and the FBI director in the past has said, that there are active terrorist investigations in every U.S. state. In the case of Germany, there are active investigations that will be going on just within the refugee population that's come in. So it really just adds to the burden of trying to engage in human surveillance, which is incredibly labor-intensive, and they just frankly don't have enough teams in Germany, despite what are pretty competent security services, to monitor all of these people. So when you add that to the already existing extremist community in Germany, which has been there for quite some time, we can talk about the Hamburg cell in the past. In fact, Germany has some very long-standing ties to the jihadist community. Now you're looking at essentially overwhelmed security services that are just trying to do what they can to make sure there's not a mass casualty attack.
And do we have the resources here to keep track of the threatening population here in the United States?
We have resources to do a pretty good job, but you're asking for essentially 100% efficacy in this, and unfortunately that's never going to be the case. So for every plot, we stop 9 plots. If one gets through, that's what's going to be on the news.
And that's why the FBI says see something, say something, because in human intelligence, our greatest resource are our own people, and people watching out for each other in public places, looking to see if something's unusual, right?
Yeah, it's also a constant learning mechanism. Every time we disrupt a plot, especially if it relies on whether it's informants, essentially people that are acting at the behest of the intelligence services, or perhaps even some of the collection methods that might be used if it gets out there in the jihadist community on these forums. Now they know this is how we can get tripped up, and so what worked in the past may not work in the future.
You brought up something really interesting, which is the counter-recruitment strategy that we need to build out in this country, which is that, we can't find all of these terrorists on the streets. NYPD can't track down and beat down the door of any suspected terrorist before before they launch an attack. So we need to get to these people before they're actually radicalized by ISIS. So what's at the root of ISIS message to a young youth that is susceptible to radicalization? Like, what is their message to them? What do they get from joining ISIS?
Well, it depends. Generally speaking, it's that they're joining a great cause, and they're striking out against infidels who are part of oppression, whether it's in the Middle East or anywhere around the world. In some cases, some of the youth, in particular, that have joined ISIS are really just looking for some sort of form of adventure and a way to, a way to derive meaning in their lives. But there are others who, depending on where you're talking about this individuals coming from, they see what's happening in Syria, in Iraq, elsewhere, and they just want to sort of join up in that fight. So the counter narrative is really a question of, well, which individual are we talking about? Because if they're trying to stop bombs from falling on Aleppo, or trying to stop what's happening in Afghanistan or in Iraq or any number of places, that's a much bigger policy issue. If you're talking about somebody who's disaffected youth coming from the UK, other European countries, they've tried these kind of radicalization programs, and again, they work to some extent, but they're not perfect, and therefore you're going to continue to deal with this problem going forward.
What are you expecting in the coming weeks? The FBI is concerned about terrorist activity on Inauguration Day. A lot of plans being put down. The Military Times is reporting that 13,000 military personnel will be present. Is that enough to calm the fears? What would you expect on Inauguration Day, and do we have the capabilities to stop it?
Yeah, I think a lot of what the counterterrorism actions that we do in this country are meant to accomplish is really to sort of put the public's mind at ease, especially this sort of show of force with many, many thousands of people, security personnel, whether military, police, and others, who gather at important events like the inauguration. It also puts in place some mechanisms of stopping an actual obvious attack from happening, like using a vehicle or something along those lines. But much of the best work happens on either the signals and intelligence side of things, meaning collecting communications of terrorists who are trying to coordinate before this kind of a mass casualty attack, or human intelligence side, which means people that are informants, people that can get close to the terrorists beforehand. You want to stop these things before they're actually operational and going, and that requires a lot of work ahead of time that you won't see on Inauguration Day or any other day.
So what's your advice for the Trump administration? What do you want to see the incoming administration do to fight back?
Well, the big advantage they have is that they take the threat in sort of a different context than the Obama administration does. They seem willing to speak about it openly, and I think that'll also lead to more sort of open thinking on the policy discussion side about how to handle it. They're going to be looking at all these problems in much the same way as the Obama administration did in terms of the actual logistics of fighting specific plots, just as, by the way, the Bush administration gave a lot of its counterterrorism policies to the Obama administration. This is often forgotten, but there are some things that really are bipartisan, and using these different tools to stop these plots falls into that category. I think you're going to see with Trump a willingness, though, to look at entry into this country, to look at immigration into this country, and that's where there'll be a difference, especially in the aftermath of something like Germany.
Sure.